Hello, everyone, and welcome to another K6 Office Hours. I'm Nicole van der Hoeven, and in this episode, you get not one or two, but three of us DevRels.
Lucky,
Paul, would you like to
lucky.
introduce yourself again?
Sure. Paul Balogh. I'm a DevRel here working on the K6 extension ecosystem.
And yep, my name's
And
Marie. Still the newest DevRel here at K6, and I predominantly look after the browser testing side of things.
Now, how long will you be able to use the
I
newest
don't know
member
until
thing? Yeah,
yeah,
I'll keep using it until we get someone new.
use it while you can. Actually, the first thing, back to going to announcements now, I think the first one is yours as well, Marie.
Yeah, so I think this is something that we've all been thinking of doing, and now that K6 is really well established within the testing community, we want to start launching like a community program, such as a champion or ambassador program. So I'm really excited to announce that hope that we are still hoping that by the end of this year we're gonna launch the first ever K6 champions program. So it's a way to recognize performance testing experts within the community who's been like really awesome advocates, in using K6. So it's our way as well of returning something back to them. So it's gonna be open now for registrations, and if you want, I guess, to be part of our next round of champions, because at the moment we've identified 5 really awesome K6 champions. So I can't wait to introduce them all once the program is much more, I guess, like much more like complete. But if you're looking at, being more active in the community, learning more about how K6 can help you and even build like your personal brand, then yeah, get in touch with us. And we're looking at different like applicants as well, from different demographics, from different sort of like regions, and even from underrepresented communities. So yeah, get in touch with us.
That's cool.
So, what are the requirements to join something like this?
Yeah. So I guess it doesn't matter if you're a software tester or you're a developer, but we know we really look for someone who's passionate about sharing their knowledge. We do have a hard requirement that this person need to demonstrate that they've advocated for K6. So whether that's through blog posts, or talking at meetups, or speaking at conferences, or even contributing to any of our open source projects. And there's a lot of awesome perks as well that we can provide to you. So I know this is gonna be like another role outside of your full-time job, so we've got awesome perks to basically like cover you for your time.
Do those perks include cookies?
This cookie myth, yeah. It will be much
Yeah,
more
I've
better,
never gotten a
better
cookie.
than cookies. I don't know who
Yeah,
keeps like saying this, that we have K6 cookies. I don't know.
it's Leandro for sure.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can blame him because he's not here.
Yeah, he's not.
yeah. I mean, we've talked about having perform mints before, but I hadn't heard
Mint, yeah,
cookies.
cookies.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So what should people do if this sounds interesting to them? Is there somewhere, oh no, Leandro's here. Everybody stop talking about him.
Uh-oh.
No, but if people want to become a K6 champion
Yeah.
potentially, where should they sign up?
Yeah, so at the moment, we still have some outstanding actions, especially from like the marketing side. So if people just want to become part, just feel free to reach one of us. So you can also reach out in our K6 community Slack channel, and we consider, case by case basis. And yeah, we'll just let you know if you've made the program or not.
See, I
Leandro with this
told you
Yeah.
it's Leandro. It really
Yeah.
is from him. This cookie myth perpetuator.
Yes, and
Anyway,
he's looking for
Paul.
the gluten-free cookies too. So special.
Getting more and more specific. Can we
Yes,
deliver
yes.
on these promises? So what were you up to, Paul?
Yeah, you might have noticed I was gone last week, but yeah, so I was fortunate enough to go to Chicago. So for Friday and Saturday was GopherCon 2022 in North America. So I was able to pick up one of these little guys. Look at that, so cute.
Aw.
Ah, that's so cute. When are we getting plushies?
I know,
Yeah.
right? We'll have to talk to our chief swag officer about that. I think that's coming around the corner. But
Oh no.
yeah, yeah.
Charlie's saying, I heard about cookies and I knew I was in the right place. Hi, K6 team. That's one
More
of our
promises a
champions
lot
right
now.
there.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Congrats. Awesome. But yeah. But yeah,
Yay,
so
Charlie.
so GopherCon was that was a lot of fun. So obviously it's for the Go development community and everything. And it's kind of funny because actually testing was a big part of this year's sessions. Now I don't know, it probably doesn't have anything to do at all that I was on the review committee for the call for papers, but but there was a lot of discussions about let's see, we had like talks about fuzzing, which is all about injecting kind of random data into your applications to just kind of find some of these edge cases. Mustafa on our security team here would be very happy on that. They're pushing that. There was even talks about contract testing, which is kind of getting into some of the things that you can do with K6, obviously. But they were talking about pacts and the pact broker and such. There was a talk on integration testing from someone from Intel, that they were using in some of their AI systems. And then I don't know, there was some crazy person too that gave a lightning talk that it was all like a Rocky Horror Picture Show, and then it was about incorporating different types of testing. I don't know who that could have been, but
That was
yes, it
totally
was
Paul,
me.
by the way.
But
That's great to
so that was an
hear.
exciting one.
It's great to hear that a lot of developers are opening their minds to testing as being part of a developer's job. Just like the reverse is happening too. Testers are opening their mind to the fact that development might be part of their job.
Yep. No, absolutely. Yeah. The whole shift left movement was a big topic for this year's conference. So that was very cool. So, right. Because this opens things up for future Gopher cons as well, for possibly, I don't know, I was going to bring it up, maybe could do some sort of a workshop. That might be kind of fun. So
Yeah. I'm game. I'll do it with you.
yeah,
Is
it
it
was a
gonna
blast.
be
But
themed as well? Like, is it gonna be themed as well? Like
yeah.
the Rocky horror show as well, or
Yeah,
Oh
of
yeah.
course.
different? Yeah, you have to wear the costumes.
Yeah, the
It'll be
precedence is
Squid Game
there. Yeah.
themed.
So it's
Good game.
there we go. Yep. Squid Games.
Yeah. The best tester survives.
Yes.
But speaking of testing, today's topic is load testing types and K6 executors. But I wanted to discuss some of these terms that we throw around first, because I think there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of semantics. What do you two think of when you think about load testing types?
Who's gonna go first?
Oh, you can go ahead.
Well, I see that you're super prepared, so I mean, maybe you should go first.
Yeah, so I guess like for me, when someone says a load testing type, so a type could be, it includes like description of like different parameters under which certain, I guess, condition we want our test to be in. So when I think of parameters, it's like things like the number of concurrent virtual users, the duration of the test, even the throughput. So we have to define, all those different types. So interestingly enough, so when I did my test bash UK talk, I gave a talk about performance testing 101. So let me just share that. So basically, I gave an overview about the different types of, load testing, because it's not just about load testing. There are other like variants, like, smoke or shakeout testing. And then within stress testing, there's also spike testing, and then soak testing. So if you're a newbie to load testing, these terms can get um, quite confusing, because, like, for me, most of them starts with the first, with the same letter. So what I've done was explained it in terms that people would understand. So for me, smoke testing would really be, I guess this is quite similar to what people are used to in terms of like smoke testing in general. I guess some people also call it shakeout testing. But basically, for me, this type of testing is where you're just verifying that your system can handle the minimal load. So it's useful to do this type of testing when you just want to verify that your test script doesn't have errors, or you want to just verify if your system still works as expected if it's been exposed to just a minimal number of load. And then, because my talk, it was very like overcook team, so I linked it back to every like overcook scenario. So if anyone of you don't know what overcook is, it's basically like a cooperative game, and you have to do all this different like unusual kitchen levels, and you just have to serve as much food as possible. So for me, if we link smoke or shakeout testing, this would be cooking with one order and then just checking if all your cooking equipments are still working as expected. Would that be the same for you, Nicole or Paul?
Yeah, I love that you bring up this overcooked example. I think you were saying it's a cooperative game. I'm like, oh, I guess it is. Because when I play with my husband, he plays by different rules. While I'm trying to, follow the recipe and get all of the ingredients together to make a dish, his goal seems to be to stand in my way and watch as I freak out more and more. And I think that's kind of why we need to talk about load testing types, right? Because it's not enough to just say, I want to run a load test. It's like the next question should be, or maybe even the first question should be why? Like, what
Yeah.
exactly are you trying to do? And each of these types and each of these goals is going to necessitate a different way of testing. So yeah, like with smoke testing, that's totally important. But in smoke testing, you're probably not going to want to just hammer the system with all of the load that you can expect right away. That's not the goal.
Yeah. And I guess if you want, so if we link this back to developers being more integrated with the testing world, they can do smoke or shakeout testing as early as possible, so it all aligns with the shift left approach, because they don't have to run a high number of virtual users. They can just pick a very small amount, and then they can just verify if everything still works as expected.
Yeah, that's like with the shakeout. That's where I think, yeah, with the developers to actually kind of establish a benchmark and then kind of see how, the performance is compared to a subsequent release, that type of a thing, just to make sure that you're not, bringing in new code that is slowing up the system or causing problems. But yeah, usually when I think about this stuff too, though, the first thing that always comes to mind is that stress test. I mean, I think not to throw shade on them, but like I just remember Super Bowl, they had the little QR code on a commercial bouncing around. Well, they got a huge hit of
Mm,
activity, and it brought down their system.
yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, that's the perfect thing, where it's like, the actual stress test or the spike test, can really check things out and make sure you're good.
Spoilers.
But yes, yes.
Okay, let me move to the next type before
Oh,
Paul
whoops.
spills.
Oh, man. But I
So,
want to talk about those the K6 cookies. Is that in one of the subsequent slides there for the
uh,
over?
no, there. I don't think you can make cookies in Overcook. But
No?
anyway, yeah. I think the next type is really what mostly people are like accustomed to. So this is with load testing. So instead of just verifying your system under minimal load, this is where you're actually verifying if your application can still behave normally if it's been exposed to a heavy number of concurrent virtual users. So this is where you're trying to mimic your production like traffic. So you want to check if your application can still behave as efficient if it's exposed to under like typical or like peak system load. And the way I've related this to Overcook is, let's say your typical order that you're expected to like I guess make is about 4 orders. So this would be checking if the kitchen can still keep up, or it can still be, I guess, function as efficient if you have 4 orders like as your sort of your typical or your peak number of orders. So this would be load testing for me.
We have a
Um,
good comment here from Mark Tomlins, who has put the link to an oldie but goodie from STPCon years ago. It is a soundbite of many performance testing types in 8 minutes. So I'm going to put a link in the chat as well to that.
wow, I need to check that out. I didn't know there are 10 types of different performance testing. So thank you for that. And the next one, so this is what Paul was talking about with the stress testing.
Sorry.
So, so the way I've explained stress testing is, say you're concerned with determining the performance limit of your system under like very extreme conditions. So I guess with the Super Bowl, or I guess like during Black Friday sales, that's when you would like to do like stress testing, because you want to check if your system can still behave as expected if it's been exposed to like really like high or extreme like load. So in terms of overcook, so I couldn't really find like more than 5 or 6. So I've just explained that, imagine you've got more than 5 orders, and then you're still cooking some orders, and it's gonna be I think you can see here that the mushroom is gonna it's gonna be like burned soon. So it's just really checking if what would happen if you're presented with a lot of orders than you are used to. So how well can you cope? Um,
My
and then
husband would
spike,
just make whatever he wants to.
you would cause more chaos.
Yeah,
Um,
it's chaos
yeah.
testing.
And then I guess within stress testing, so there's also spike testing, and this is where instead of like a gradual load, you want to immediately overwhelm the system with extreme loads. So this is particularly useful if you want to test how your system behaves if you've been exposed to like a sudden surge of traffic. And then you also want to check if your application recovers once the traffic has subsided. So to me, the difference between stress testing and spike testing is that with spike tests, the load it's very sudden, whereas with stress, the load is gradual. Um, what's my overcook image? Yeah. So Again, I couldn't find more than six, but just imagine that while you're cooking your typical amount of orders, like suddenly in one go, you've been asked to cook five more orders at the same time. So there's like a sudden spike of orders. Um, and then lastly, so there's also like soak testing that I've talked about as part of this like talk. So this is where you're concerned with your system's reliability over like a longer period of time. So it's quite similar to, I guess, load testing, but like in terms of the duration, it's much more extended. It could last for like um hours, or I don't know if there's any been scenario where people do soak testing for days. Is that a very common scenario, or normally it's just for a couple of hours?
I don't think it's I don't think it's common, but I have seen it a few times. So I don't think it's uncommon either.
Yeah. So I couldn't find any overcooked image, but the way I've explained soak testing is that it's similar to, let's say, you're cooking your typical order, but then you're working like long shifts. You don't get any breaks. It's like very long, like extended period of like, trying to cook the same five orders or something. So it's really done over an extended period of time. And yeah,
So,
that's
question for you. Sorry.
yeah, no,
Question for
that's
you both though. Do you make any distinction between load testing types and scenarios?
I mean, so in the scenarios, as far as we talk about in the configuration, um, yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, to me, the scenario is just like one piece, right? Because the overall test is going to be comprised of multiple moving parts. So the scenario being just one piece of that overall test. So I mean, a soak test could have several scenarios included in it. So it's just kind of like I don't know, an umbrella.
Yeah. And for me as well, because like if we just talk about a generic test scenario, it's explaining, what is our objective when it comes to, a user trying to use the application. Is our objective trying to, test how it will behave if, any of our services are down, or is it testing, for example, what would happen if we have like a high number of concurrent users. So for me, those are load testing scenarios, and it could be a combination of different like test cases. So there's like different ways of trying to achieve the outcome of that particular scenario.
Mark has a question here as well. Do you see people running all load test types on every release or just a subset?
I think so I can use an example from my previous team. So what we've done is every time we merge something to our main branch, we run like our basic load testing script. And then if we want to run like a stress test, or a soak test, we can just trigger the job manually, because we know that these can take much longer time. So we don't necessarily want to have a longer time to deploy to production, but it's there in case we want to run a soak test or a spike test, I guess, on like a particular day. But what we've done is we've got our load testing script, which is a prerequisite for us, that it needs to pass. There's no errors before we can deploy to production. How about you both? Is that a similar experience, or?
Yeah, I think as much as it might seem like, oh, it's always better if everybody just does all the types of tests, the reality is that time is limited limited, so your approach has to be risk-based and also informed by your objectives. And so, for example, a good example is the spike test. That might not make sense for all applications. There are some apps or websites, for instance, where they're not necessarily testing for a big single event where they see the spike of virtual users or traffic at a very compressed point. Maybe what they're actually trying to figure out is if there's a memory leak. And in that case, maybe it's not really worthwhile to do a spike test. Oh, I see someone waiting in the wings. You can add yourself if you'd like to, because last time I just added you, and that was probably not the right thing to do. Hello,
Surprise!
Leandra.
No, I
Oh
was
boy,
watching.
talking about chaos testing.
Oh my
Right?
God, full house today. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
that's awesome.
No, I was watching and I was
Yeah,
like, oh my God, this is so interesting. I would like to contribute and
I
bring some
think this is
perspective.
the first office hours where there's four of us, no? Yeah?
I think
yeah,
it
I
is.
think so
That's
too.
very
I think
good.
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, we had the Brady Bunch squares going on now, you know.
Yeah. So, what did you want to say about spike tests or something, Leandro?
So I was listening a little bit earlier. I don't know how much more was told while I was transferring from watching on LinkedIn till getting here. But yeah, there are so many differences when you have a different type of load test, some different situation. Some customers or organizations generally do not know very well what type of load test they should be doing, and they was just like, just check mark the performance something,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And they want you to do all the different types that Marie showed earlier. And sometimes that's not the best approach because not everyone needs everything all at once.
Yep.
Wasn't that the title of a movie? And I don't know. It's very context sensitive depending on what type of system are you creating, what business needs do you have, what business situations do you have. So it's very interesting that I don't remember. I think it was Mark who mentioned it, and it's a wild card to talk organizations and customers into, hey, this is your situation right now. I think you should be going over here or over here. No, no, I wanted everything. It's not a good idea to have everything in a load test. How can I show that? But yeah, that's part of the contributions that I wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think,
here's
I mean, and it depends on
go on.
I was just going to say, like, going back kind of like with the different types, like, I always think of like with, if you're going to include it in your developer pipeline, for instance, you're only going to probably do the shakeout test. That's really the one that you're concerned about. The bigger tests, like a stress or a soak test or the stress test, where it's kind of, you're looking at the overall system as a whole, maybe
Yeah.
not as a specific piece. That's when you can do those longer running tests. That's why I feel that those are more, I guess, more relevant. Yeah. I just had to inject that before I forgot about it.
No, that's a very
Yeah,
good addition. Oh, sorry.
there's a comment here from Jesse who says, I often find myself needing to tailor my exec functions for the scenario that I want to run it with. So this is already getting into how to do it specifically in K6 as well. And I think load testing types and scenarios, I think in general, I personally think of scenarios as being broader. They're more like a situation that could consist of multiple test types for different functionalities or transactions. But in K6, we also have different ways to do it. One thing is like how you want to structure the test as a whole. Executors are more nitty gritty and in the implementation of it. Like say you have an idea of a load testing type that you want to do, there are
Mm.
still different ways to implement that, which is where it gets a little confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I guess a scenario, it can use different executors, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Some of
we
these
can share
executors,
some of that.
yeah, it depends a lot
Sorry,
on
go
what
on,
type of
Leandro.
scenario and how do you want to model and the needs and the type. Because I remember in other tools or in the old days, it was almost like rocket science or statistics saying like how much do I need it to increase to get to this throughput and how many virtual users am I gonna need. And I think it's great advantage to have at K6 that some of those things that we had to calculate it by hand, and
Mm.
what is the think time, what are the iterations, how fast for them to go, you can just put the number of iterations that you
Yeah.
need, or just do whatever number of VUs you need to get to this throughput and vice versa.
Yeah.
So it's great to have one to the every different type of situation and scenario, right?
Yeah. I guess it's also giving us a template that we can use. So, like you said, rather than calculating all, these different information by ourselves, K6 can just provide an executor, then we can just tailor it to our specific requirements. Oh, can't hear Nicole.
Oh,
I
oops,
think you're
sorry.
muted,
I
Nicole.
was talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oops. Usually people have to tell me to mute, not to unmute. But anyway, so this is an example of a K6 script, and this is what we're talking about. There are these test options at the start here, and under scenarios is one of the options is an executor. So contacts here is one of the scenarios, is the only scenario here. And this contact scenario is also setting a specific executor. Now, K6 has a lot of these depending on how you want to run the test, and here are all of them. Paul, do you want to take this first one?
The shared iterations, yeah, so this is where you just say, yeah, run this 10,000 times, and then yeah, we're going to go through, and then it's going to just run it 10,000 times. That's probably the simplest, I guess, really. And actually, it's gonna run them as fast as possible, I guess, whether it's you have 10 VUs or 5. It's just going to go through. One VU may do more than another, but anyway. But yeah, but that's your simplest, most brute force method.
So I guess with
Jesse's
this,
pointing out that shared iterations
Yeah.
are also very easy to
yeah,
communicate to stakeholders.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, hit it with 10,000 requests, and then see
The
what
full
happens to
throttle.
the system.
yeah.
You're saying, Marie?
I guess with this as well, there's less emphasis on the number of virtual users as long as we've executed a fixed amount of iterations. Because some virtual users can perform, I guess, more iterations. Some might perform less, but we don't actually care who performs, what, as long as um, reached the fixed number of iterations that was like configured.
So Marcus pointing out that if you have sleep or delay in your script, they wouldn't run as fast as possible. Yeah, so the iterations would be run as fast as possible, but you can still add think time in within those functions within each iteration to kind of spread it out. So Leandro, when would you use something like this?
With the shared iterations, it's
Uh,
generally when you know how many, like the total throughput that you want to simulate in a scenario for that given process or set of steps. I generally like to think of a global set of hits, to call it, in a way that you will get in a load test execution or a performance test execution. It's and to give a comparison, I'm going to step ahead a little bit on the next one, because another that we used to have to do, and that's where I was mentioning earlier that we have this difference, is when it's per VU. each virtual user, we have to assign to each one of the threads, as Marie was mentioning earlier, on shared. We don't care that much about the number of VUs, but just have this global number. In the old days, or traditionally, what I had to do is to say, okay, I'm going to have 10 virtual users, and this system has to have this number of executions, let's say 5,000. So among these 10 users, well, each one of them will have to generate 500. So these are the both differences. On one, you give that 5,000 global number, and the other one you say, hey, out of the users, I'm going to have 10. Each one does 500. So it's modeling in the end what is the best approach, and depending on the situation on your load test is when you choose one or the other. In this case, I would say those two are kind of interchangeable, depending, because at times per virtual user, it's complicated when you may be varying the number of virtual users, you may have different loads, or you're worried that a single user may go crazy, be kicked out, and try to do as many iterations as possible. So weird things where you have to be careful and choose one over the other.
Yeah, and I
I'm just
think one good thing to do here is for just to think about test data as well. So, for example, with shared iterations, one use case for it would be maybe when we're trying to create precisely X rows of test data during a prep run. So maybe it's not even for the load test, right? But you just need 1,000 things in the database. That might be a good time to use shared iterations. But maybe when you're actually running the load test, you want to say, well, I want each virtual user to be able to use a certain number, maybe 250 rows of or 20 rows of the test data each. So that's something where you're starting to set it by VU. And in that case, I might go for per VU iterations. Mark is saying here as well, I use shared iterations early in load testing in Dev or QA, where the objective is the total elapsed time of the test. Like when your requirement is measure how many seconds it takes to run 1,000 requests as concurrently or quickly as possible.
So I guess it's like really useful to use shared iterations if you just want to incorporate like a really quick, I guess, performance test as early as possible as part of your CI pipelines.
Yeah. Yeah. Or even if you're doing a contract test, because then you just need one single iteration just to verify that your APIs haven't changed.
Yeah, and what I would not use it for is if you're testing for user concurrency in particular, because with or like when you need certain users to be doing a certain number of iterations, because when you use shared iterations, there's none of that. You're not controlling how many of those iterations are done per VU. It's just going to automatically assign it based on the total. So if you do care, then maybe use per VU iterations.
Yeah.
Leandra, do you want to do this constant one? Oh, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm muted. Started to like,
Jeez, get a
which
bunch
one?
of DevRels together.
And chaos happens.
Yeah,
So
everyone has hardware mutes. Oh, wait, question from Mark before we move on. Shared iterations doesn't have a ramp up stage, right?
Correct.
I don't
Yeah,
think
it
so.
doesn't.
I was like, right?
yeah. Yeah, no. So,
Just brute
oops, I'm not
force.
sharing my screen.
I think the
So
ones
this
that
is an
deal
example
with
of
it.
it.
Yeah, I was gonna say the ones that have stages, I think are the ones that deal with ramp ups, downs, and those variable
Yeah.
stages.
Yeah.
Yep. So you just set then the number of iterations and then how long it takes, and then the number of views, and it'll automatically be allocated.
Yep.
Okay. So Sorry, Leandro, you were saying about the constant views?
Oh yeah, this is, I believe, kind of similar of what Mark was mentioning earlier, that you have this number of BUs and just let them be as fast as possible. Well, you may have sleep times in between or have configure something like this, but you release them in a fixed amount of time, let's say 1 minute, 5 minutes, an average period of time, and let them complete as many iterations as they can during that period of time. That's
Mhm.
also very standard load testing. We generally used to configure this like your execution should be in this period of time, maybe just no ramp up, just start doing it and for this amount. And a bit useful, as Paul was mentioning, for continuous integrations where you cannot leave like whatever you finish this amount of load, be good with it. No, no, no. Just period of time. I have only 5 minutes in my pipeline, a
Mm.
minute, a few seconds, and that's it. Stress it as much as you can, or given the configuration with the virtual users, and get done with this. This is good also for repeatability. If you have to repeat this test again and again, as you are showing, 10 users, 30 seconds in the pipeline. The users are configured, they have their settings, they know how much are they gonna iterate, or the system slowing down or response will determine how many times will they be able to complete. But this is very useful when you have this fixed duration, like in this period, try to do as much as you can.
Yeah. I guess it's useful as well. So if you just want to do like a shakeout test, so you don't like necessarily want to run a high number of virtual users. So you just want to perform as many, iterations as possible for the duration that you've specified, whether that's 30 seconds or like a minute or something.
I also think that this is maybe one of the easier ones to explain. Like,
Yes.
I think that Jesse was saying that the first one that we discussed, the shared iterations, is easy to explain. Constant
Mhm.
views is easy also because you can think of it in terms of having a script, a single script that tries to replicate what a real user does, like a real end user of your application. And then to a stakeholder, you can say, what does it mean to have 100 constant views? Well, think of it as 100 customers looking at a site, for looking at an
Right.
e-commerce site, for instance. So for those sort of tests where you can have a one-to-one comparison, which isn't always the case, then I think the constant views is pretty good for that. Oh, I'm sorry. I
And
think I missed a question about from Perf Oli. Perf
yeah,
Oli has a good question about spike tests.
I was gonna
Where
refer
would you
to that.
want?
Let
Sorry,
me
you go ahead.
show that question because I was taking a look at it as well. And as an example, this with continuous and a fixed amount of time, I like a lot to use it for spike tests because it's a spike test of a minute, 30 seconds, and have a very good amount of users. Certainly try to do as much as you can because many times on spike tests, you are not related to the iterations or to how many times or increase the users in order to manage to get a given throughput. With this, you have a number of users that access suddenly on your system and try to do the requests. Even if the system is not responding, this amount of users is what you're trying to simulate on a spike test. I like these ones a lot for this question. Perfoli, I think that's how you pronounce it. Um, Another, going back to your question, a spike test um, thing that you have to take into account is that you cannot use an average or regular scenario that you use for other things to simulate a spike test. On those situations, you have specific processes that are the ones that the users will want to come to your site to do, rather than the average day. So you focus on triggering those, get to the expected spike that you're thinking, and you can use this. scenario setting very well to say, I would need it for a minute. Spike it, you said 10, 20 seconds. This is very good as well. 10, 20 seconds, have this number of users, and stress your given process.
Yeah, and Mark was also suggesting that he would make the connection or request timeouts in K6 really high, or meaning longer, but then also have a proxy in between K6 and your app, maybe Squid, with delay and latency, so that you're waiting for all of those threads are waiting, and then it goes all at once. I probably would not use constant VUs for it, but there are some other ones later on that have the stages that might be more suitable. Well, let's keep going, and then we can go back and say what would we use for these situations. Marie, would you like to do ramping VUs?
Yep. So I guess this is different from constant VUs in a sense that rather than having a fixed number of VUs, you basically have a variable number of VUs. You can have variable number of iterations as well that are executed in a specified amount of time. So I guess you can use this if you want to simulate like spikes on like different stages. So you can have stages where you want to simulate like a ramp up or ramp down, where you have different number of views as well as different like duration for each of the stages. So it's like variable. It's much more I guess configurable compared to the constant views.
Yeah. So in ramping VUs, we set stages, each with a number of virtual users and duration, but then the number of iterations within each of those stages really varies. So it's more based on the VUs and the duration. So we were talking about that spike test. You could also do that with this. You could have one stage of like just normal load, whatever that is, and then a second stage after a certain point where there's a lot. Another way that you could do it is you could have multiple scenarios. So I think Mark in the comments was already saying you could have one scenario that just applies heavy load, maybe using like the constant VUs executor, for instance, and then have another scenario that has a delayed start and then just goes with after a certain amount of time with a lot of VUs. So different ways to do it. That's why you can't really say like, oh, for a spike test, you always have to use this executor, because K6 is more flexible than that, which is a good thing, but it also means that there are many ways to accomplish the same thing.
And it also depends on what do you define as a spike test, because a spike could be kind of gradual, or like sudden, like no ramp up, suddenly you have all the users. And some other organizations, for them, a spike test counts as a 5-minute ramp up. But that 5-minute ramp up gets really, really high, counts as a spike. So that also, you have different variations of each one.
Yeah, so when we look at the difference between constant VUs and the ramping VUs, with the constant one, we see that there are 10 virtual users for the whole duration. But in ramping, you get to set that at every stage. Now, this could be the same too. So you could just have it at 10 as well, and then maybe just increase the duration or whatever, but you do get to set it at each stage. And this is when you can do like a ramp up here, and then have like a steady state, then have another one that ramps down or something like that. Let's go to another one. Constant arrival rate. Okay, so this is where you fix the number of requests per second, or RPS. That's one way of measuring throughput, and duration. And then you allow the number of virtual users and iterations to vary. So let's see what that looks like. This is all from the K6 docs, by the way, so feel free to grab any of these and you can copy them and then tweak them as well.
Yeah, we got the graphs on there too to show the shape of the pattern that
is
that
there?
happens.
There it is.
Yeah.
I worked long and hard to do those.
Oh, I should have
And
been
you never
showing the.
noticed? You
This is
didn't
what you're talking.
appreciate
I'm
those?
sorry.
Yeah.
I appreciate you, Paul. This
Nicole.
is great. Why don't you tell us about this?
Well, I was waiting for the next one, which is my favorite, the ramping arrival rate. So
Okay,
you can
well,
go
we're
ahead
not
and talk
there
about the
yet.
content.
Spoiler,
I
Mr.
know.
Spoiler.
I'm always just jumping ahead.
Yeah. So what I would use this for is maybe when I have a more simple load profile with like a request throughput requirement. So maybe it's not VU based like the other
Mm.
ones. Maybe it's more important that the system can handle, 100 requests per second. So in that case, this would be a really good one to use as well. But what is the difference between this constant arrival rate and the next one, Paul?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. It's so yeah, the ramping, that's so getting to add in the stages again now with the same, so now it's just like the constant arrival rate, but now you introduce the stages. So you can have these varied. So if you click into that, and then you'll see that all the way down to the beautiful little graph that's been included in the documentation there, you can see, and that's and that's where you
By
can
an
really
unknown
define
person.
by an unknown, non-named person. But this is the one where you can really create those cool spikes and
Mm.
define how long, how steep is that line going to be for the spike, and then. But no, this is the coolest one because I mean this is the one that you can really tweak and do some fun scenarios with, honestly, creating those spikes. And then you don't have to worry about the VUs because you're just worrying about, how fast, how fast is that faucet of events coming in, the activity. You don't have to worry about how many VUs is creating that. The system's going to calculate the
Mm.
best way to achieve that throughput that you're looking for. But yeah, this is the cool one. This is the bomb, as the kids would say.
I I remember playing around with this, and I got this error because maybe I didn't start the test with the right number of VUs.
Oh, was
So
it?
I guess just keep in mind that you might get an error that, oh, there's no more VU, to like allocate. So you can
Yeah.
just increase like the pre-allocated one or increase the max VU rather than figuring out that number by yourself.
Yeah, you definitely have to set your
Yeah, that's such a
maximum
good point.
VUs to the
Mm.
an appropriate number. Otherwise, yeah, you could say I want 1,000 requests per second,
Yeah.
but based on the actual performance of your methods and that, you may not be able to achieve that with 10 VUs or whatever. So you just have to
That's a
watch
really
that.
good point. I think this does a lot of the maths for you, and it dynamically adjusts based on how many iterations you were able to run. So for example, if you were running a lot of iterations at the start of the test because it was just starting up and the system wasn't overloaded, then it might change that when later on the system is overloaded and responding very slowly, and then each virtual user is then able to do less. So it's good to be, I think, on the more it's good to have a higher max VU than you might think, just to allow for that extra room. Because if suddenly your system isn't responding, then you want the test to be able to hammer it with more, if that's something
If
you would want
needed.
to have
Yep.
happen.
Mhm.
There's also interesting uses for each one of the ones that the continuous ramping up. I like those for capacity tests. For those when you are just like increasing until it breaks and then you
Mhm.
stop things. That one is very useful. And funny enough, I have another perspective on the variable ones. I know are the exciting ones, the ones that I can do lots of switching and going up and but most of the time, at least in my experience, it's you are kind of mixing too many scenarios into one. Like, hey, this is a scenario, this is another one. It's low, this is another one, and in again in experience, the best bang for your buck is when you try to narrow down your type of tests and keep it simple. I know it's a great toy to have, and at times seriously is really important that you can do weird variations, but this is for, I would say, specific situations, because many times I've seen organizations, yeah, and I want to simulate in production when the users wake up, when they are having their coffee, going a little bit, and then it's like, why don't you just simulate the tough time in the day? Like, that's the one that you are gonna have problems, because they can go crazy, they go crazy, but there's not so much richness in results and returns on that exercise. But
You know,
I think what I'm saying is handled with care. It's not
yeah,
for all the
you
time.
can go overboard.
Yeah.
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 You can over
Yeah.
engineer your test scenarios.
There's a
Yeah,
really
we've
nice
all been
comment
there.
as well. There's a really nice comment here as well. I think his name is Sean Foley. Yeah, he said that consistency is important. People tend to really want to take creativity overboard. So totally
Yeah.
agree to that.
Yeah.
I'm always waving.
So also the we were talking about the ramping arrival rate being one of the more flexible because you can set those stages and do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But actually I think the most flexible is the last one, which is externally controlled. And this is a little bit of an odd one because it seems deceptively simple, except you can change it at runtime. So this is really good for when you're troubleshooting, like you maybe don't really know how your system is going to behave and you need to be able to make decisions on the fly. Maybe if there are a lot of errors, then it might not make sense to ramp it up even more. Maybe you want to ramp it down to see if it recovers, for instance. So you run the settings here are like what the test will start initially, but then after that you can either use the REST API or the CLI. So you can do like pause, resume, scale. So scaling it up or down to be able to change any of the settings like the duration or the VUs as well. So that's I think the most flexible one because you can do it at runtime.
Hmm.
And I think that one is extremely powerful, especially for continuous integration for pipelines where you have other parameters that are going to be added into your scenario depending on what is happening in the pipeline, in production, in your continuous processes, and that you can modify more or less on demand. Especially, I can think this one really useful for if you are using K6 as for synthetics as an example, and certainly you need to change something to keep it under the SLOs that you are seeing in production, or modify it like, hey, just take down the users because we're getting errors, something is happening in production. We know, just modify it on the run, on the fly, so that we can work through things on it. So there are several advantages to being able to modify from the outside, because that's another one on many other solutions. Once you start, it's set in stone and very difficult to change settings. And with this being able to play around with it, or probably your users disconnected, died, and you really just need, hey, start a few more because these
Mhm.
initial ones already stopped their loops. So you can tell I like this one as well a lot.
I'm just
So
thinking.
what do you like? Oh, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I just had a thought because if this is the most flexible type of executor, and we also have a chaos like product, it would be great to see how that would work with the chaos extension. Because I haven't played around with this executor, to be honest, so it would be really cool to see how we can externally control the number of views, the number of durations, while we're also doing other things. So it would be interesting to see how, for example, we could combine that with xk6 browser or with the chaos extension as well. So that could be an idea for another office hours episode.
No, it's a very good one, because when you mention like changing on demand or on the fly the blast
Yeah,
radius for a
yeah.
chaos experiment, that's also a very good application. Sorry, Nicole.
You can you can script it as well because it's accessible through the REST API, right? So you could
Yeah,
have
so it's
another
just a bash
scenario that's
script or
kind of
something.
like watching, saying if it could be even with XK6 browser, for instance, if you have that as well. If what some of the browser front end metrics exceeds the thresholds, then lower the number of VUs or something like that. That you could do all sorts of things like that. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you're doing it on the fly, like you're standing at the terminal or sitting at the terminal and saying stop, go, then that is ultimate flexibility, but it doesn't make for a test that's very repeatable. So
Repeatable.
something to
Yeah.
have in mind.
I think I've read somewhere as well in our docs that this is the only executor that's not supported in K6 Cloud. So if we have users also using K6 Cloud, then they can't use this executor.
Good point. So to wrap up, which one is everybody's favorite? You can only choose one, Marie. Which one is it?
Gosh. I think I'll go for constant VUs purely because if I'm, I guess, trying to explain performance testing, to someone who's totally new to it, constant VUs would be for me is would be the easiest executor to explain. So I'll start off with that. Yeah.
What about you, Paul?
I think I kind of already let the cat out of the bag earlier. It's the ramping arrival rate, unless I use multiple scenarios and then I use simpler ones, and just kind of replicate. That's another story.
Looks like we have
Yeah.
a lot of constant VUs fans as well.
Uh-oh.
Oops. What about you, Leandro? Which one do you want best? Like best?
Well, I generally get that question with favorite tool or favorite, and I'm gonna answer it depends. I don't have
Oh, come
a
on.
but if you made me like here's a knife on your
Yes,
throat,
I
you
am
gotta pick
making
one.
you.
I'll go through externally controlled. That is the most flexible, and if you left me in the desert just with that at hand, I think I'll be able to do most of what is needed.
Yeah, that's totally true. I was tempted to go for that because I love the flexibility. I'm gonna have to say it's the same as Paul's because I think ramping arrival rate is the best way to measure throughput. Like I think I totally agree with Marie that constant VUs is the easiest to explain because it's in terms of users. But really using virtual users as a way to measure test throughput is not, it's pretty ambiguous, and it is easier to understand, but I think it's I prefer to use requests per second, and I think that is more indicative of what's happening. And also I love the stages. I also, just like Mark in the comments, he says, I love me every executor that allows for a ramp up, anything that supports stages. Totally agree.
Yeah.
It looks
But
better
just in
visually
case,
as well.
yeah, yeah, it looks like it's not just a flat line. So yeah, but in case it wasn't clear, though, there isn't really a right answer. There's no one best in every situation. But I hope that what we've discussed helps you, give you a bit of guidance for how you would go about choosing which one is right for your situation. But I think we are out of time. Thank you, all three of you, for joining me. You too, Leandro. It was a surprise. Barely spoken to you with all your conferencing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyone else have anything? Any last pieces of advice?
Don't go too crazy with your scenarios.
Yeah.
And with that, thank you everybody for watching us and hanging out in the comments with us. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
everyone.